It was a great meal. Today, we're going to talk about the ecomagnetic metaphysical environmental meta-narrative and explore its neo-pagan and pantheistic Darwinian worldview in hope of becoming one with the ethereal symphonies of the collective cosmos. You okay with that? You got that, right? Long time ago, the monarch of the world in those days walked out on the balcony of his golden palace, and he looked out over the vast golden empire, and he said, "My, I've done a pretty good job. Is this not great? Starts with a B, Babylon, which I have built." And God in his mercy looked down from heaven and said, "Nebuchadnezzar, don't do that. People who are wallowing in pride are in danger of losing their grip on reality and sanity. Don't do that." Well, as the story unfolds, and by the way, I was astounded when I was young to discover that King Nebuchadnezzar wrote one of the chapters of the Bible. Isn't that amazing? The great monarch of the greatest kingdom, probably, ever in history, wrote Daniel chapter 4. He starts with these words, "I, Nebuchadnezzar, thought it good to show unto you the things which the Most High God hath wrought unto me." Fantastic story, and it gets even more exciting as you go on. He becomes insane. He is driven from humanity. He goes out into the field and he's eating grass like an animal. Yeah, he was the first hippie, I think. His hair was long and he was on grass. And, pardon me for that. At the end of those days, though, 7 long years, something incredible happens. He looks up toward heaven at some point in the end of this journey and he says, "I need you." His sanity returns unto him. And then he writes Daniel chapter 4. And he closes with these words. "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and honor and extol the God of heaven, all whose ways are righteous, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble." That is an incredible story. But what kind of a world are we living in today, friends? Is it a pagan world? Is it a neo-pagan world? Is it a Christian world? By the way, neo-pagan is kind of a fancy sociological term. All it means is new pagan. Neo means new. If you see neo something, it's usually new something. Neo-conservative is a new conservative. Neo-pagan is a new pagan. Well, the rising generation, the millennial generation, is the first generation in our modern era to receive a fully developed neo-pagan cosmology, another big word, masquerading as the correct view of history and demanding to be inscribed in public policy. Big statement, isn't it? I think you'll find out that it's supported. So where is our culture headed today, friends? It's a well-worked-out cosmology, and cosmology is just a way that you look at the world, your belief on how the world came to be here. Another word for that is worldview. And it has a well-worked-out cosmology about the nature of existence, and it is thoroughly pagan. I'll try to defend that as we go on. The culture which you and I live in, the one in which I was born in, and young people are now born, comes from somewhere. Not neutral, friends. No, culture is not neutral. It comes from somewhere. And our culture today is being profoundly affected by anti-Christian notions passed off as the truth. And for Christians generally, not just millennials, but Christians in general, we need to know what this thinking is. And just to give you a sample, a taste of what this kind of thinking is that has taken hold in Western culture in the recent years, let me just cite a statement. See what you think of it. This is by Gerry Rifkin. I quote, "We no longer feel ourselves to be guests in someone else's home and therefore obliged to make our behavior conform with a set of pre-existing cosmic rules. It is our creation now. We make the rules. We establish the parameters of reality. We create the world, and because we do, we are no longer beholden to outside forces. We no longer have to justify our behavior, for we are now the architects of the universe. We are responsible to nothing outside of ourselves, for we are the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever." Unquote. Gerry Rifkin. This man is one of the guiding thinkers of the European Union, by the way. He's an important thinker over there in Europe, and he artfully expresses, I believe, how this present culture thinks. Now, in 2015, we were given a more up-to-date vision of how the world thinks on CNN by a guy named Chris Como. I was raised without television, by the way, but I do research from time to time. And I'm extremely apolitical. German Baptists are raised not to vote, not to be political at all. But by nature, we're very conservative. We just can't help it. I mean, we believe in the Bible, hard work, don't rely on the government, all that stuff. But I am an observer of what's happening in the culture. And this is a 2015 up-to-date version by Chris Como, who said, "Our rights do not come from God, they come from man," unquote. Well, friends, this is the culture that you and I are living in. This is the culture that your children are hearing and accepting on primetime television, if you have one. We don't have a TV in our home. I tell people we can't afford it. They kind of laugh. But we can't afford the influence. And it must have helped because our children were some of the top readers in their class. But this expression by Chris Cuomo is what is known as modern truth, and by Gerry Rifkin as well. This is the world in which you and I are called to proclaim the everlasting gospel. This is the world that we have inherited. The creation of this cosmology, which is a well-worked-out way of looking at things, has been developed over the last few years, and things are changing quickly. Have you noticed? Great changes are about to take place in our world, and the final movements will be... Exactly, I thought you'd know that one. Quote by Ellen White. In 1993, the magazine The Nation said this: "If the gay rights cause," and this was 30 years ago, friends, 1993. "If the gay rights cause a small and despised sexual minority is to survive and eventually succeed, it will need to invent for itself a complete cosmology." It did. It's a pagan cosmology. It's a religion to these folks, friends. The philosophical approval of homosexuality is intrinsically religious. Number one, you're not having children to violate the natural order of the planet. That brings the environmentalists on board. And so we have watched in a recent period in our own history the development of this worldview. Maybe the success of this way of thinking is because the Christian cosmology has been weakened in the Western world, friends. Churches are bleeding members. The Methodists, you know what's happening there. Take a good long look at it, friends. Take a good long look. The Advent message, the Advent structure is patterned after the Methodist Church, by the way. And so Christianity has dissipated to a large degree in the Western culture, not entirely by the grace of God, but we have gone through a period of time, and we're now in the midst of it, where people no longer believe the Bible. They no longer believe that what we say is true. But their hearts are looking for something. They're looking for hope. They're looking for help. And they're looking for healing. And there's a long history to this, friend. For most of Western history, Christianity dominated, certainly in my lifetime. And in my fathers and grandfathers, God the Father was the fundamental notion of who God was. But now we're entering into different waters. You've all heard of secular humanism, right? Yeah. When I was a boy, I grew up hearing about secular humanism, and we thought it was something that was really bad, and it was. But we had the attack of secular humanism, which brought about in its own way the decline of Christianity, where man is God. The fundamental cardinal belief of secular humanism is that man himself is God, man is divine. Well, the reason of man became the only source of truth, and we heard that first in the French Revolution, didn't we? That lasted from a period of about 1789 to 1989, and I've pinpointed this 200-year period as my best guess of the high point of secular humanism. About a 200-year period. 1789 to 1989. From the fall of the Bastille to the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989. From the French Revolution to the fall of the wall in East Berlin. This 200-year period represents the high point, I believe, of secular humanism. And that's important that we believers understand these long traditions. Why? Because they affect the way we still think and the way people around us think. There are many people today, especially in universities at the teaching level, who still believe in secular humanism, but a strange thing has happened. A strange thing has happened. At the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, while these humanists, with their hubris, were predicting the end of religion, in fact, Marx himself said it was the opiate of the people. Remember, it was a drug. Carl Jung said it was a psychological disability from which you needed healing. In our time, 2023, oddly enough, we are seeing the decline of secular humanism. That is fascinating. It is no longer, in a certain sense, the massive tool of the devil to attack Christian truth, because what is rising up to replace it is a belief not in God as the Creator, but a belief in the return of the Divine Mother. Oh, yeah. Secular humanism is on the run. It's being chased away by neo-paganism. Now, who on earth would have imagined that this proud, sophisticated Western culture based on reason would now be seduced by a neo-pagan myth? I wouldn't have. But I believe that's where we are today, friend. The final movements will be rapid, and they are changing rapidly. Many, many people are turning away from the so-called optimism of atheistic secular humanism, materialism, and they are looking for spirituality somewhere. They are looking for God, but most of them don't know it. They heard the critique of postmodernism, which found that secular humanism was totally circular. Its reasoning was circular. It believed that its own reason was true, but it had no way of proving it except by assuming that its reason was true. Circular reasoning. And so we see the embarrassing failure with the critique of postmodernism. Postmodernism, by the way, is just saying that what is going on in culture is a reliable guide to truth. Who among us would believe that today? Mercy. Take a look around at what's happening in the culture. Do we really want to adopt the conviction that that is a reliable guide to truth? That's what postmodernism was. And it's fading away. Something else is rising in its place. A new religion, a neo-pagan religion. You see, you can't get out of this world that God created, friends, where you need to say true things. And that's our job. That's our task. But these kind of effects produce the decline of atheistic secular humanism. And in its place, and I never expected to see this, I was born in 1960. I was born into a culture that was predominantly Christian in the wider culture of the nation. And beyond that, into an Anabaptist subculture that was thoroughly Christian. I never, in my wildest dreams, ever imagined that this very center of the Christian faith here in America, which sent out missionaries to the ends of the earth, would years later become the toxic center of this pagan idea. But it is. I'll explain why I say that. You and I have gone through culture shock in the last 10 years. haven't you? Mm-hmm. Sure, even more so in the last 3 years. Now, America is still a very religious culture, but it's changing religion. And this new religion is pagan romanticism, the worship of nature and cultural Marxism. The worship of nature and cultural Marxism. It's a new religion. Activism is its good works. It's the good works of this new system, but it's a religion with no cross, no Savior, no forgiveness, and no heaven. I mentioned during Sabbath school that part of what it means to be created in the image of God is to have the ability and the desire to give and receive love. We are created, you and I, with the image of God as the blueprint. And that means we have the ability to give and receive love. The devil knows that. And he tries very hard to get you and I to padlock that door so we can't receive it, we can't give it. We're stuck. We're stuck. But God has the key. Jesus has the key to this kind of thing. And by the way, Paul gives evidence of this reality in 2 Corinthians when he writes to the Corinthians. And he says, "O Corinthians, open your heart to me." They had locked it against him. He had to write some hard things in his first letter, and they couldn't handle it. And so they put up a wall. They locked the door of their heart. And Paul said, "Please open your hearts unto me." Twice in 2 Corinthians, you'll see that nomenclature. So, people are looking for truth. They're looking for hope, and they're not finding it. So they've invented a new religion. Carl Jung, maybe you've heard of him, maybe not. He was what's known as the father of psychology. He, along with Sigmund Freud, in the beginning of the 20th century, invented psychology. And I believe Carl Jung succeeded because he believed in spirituality, and he was very critical of secular humanism, which is interesting. He wanted a place for spirituality, but it wasn't the spirituality of the Bible, even though he was the son of a Lutheran pastor. He had this vision in the beginning of the 20th century of a new humanism. It was based on neo-pagan myths. He was an expert on alchemy, Gnosticism, Hinduism, and his goal was to eliminate from the West the notion of guilt. Friends, where does guilt come from? I'll just give you an example. Okay, I'm just driving down life's merry road, and I'll gone along, everything's great, heading toward the distant city, and there's a temptation all of a sudden pops out at you with bright neon lights. And you say, let's see what that's all about, So you get off the road, you drive over there towards that temptation. And if you fall into it, guess what? 3 things happen immediately to your heart and mind. 3 consequences, 3 darts from heaven come down into your life. They are guilt, shame, and fear. The dashboard of your life begins flashing. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. Come back, repent. Return unto me, and I will return unto you, the Lord says. Guilt, shame, and fear are 3 consequences allowed by God to wake us up when we have done something wrong, and praise God for that. Carl Jung, on the other hand, was determined to eliminate guilt from the human psyche. You don't need to feel bad about anything. Okay. He also had 2 spirit guides, by the way. Well, that's not good, is it? The names were Philemon and Ka. We know this from his posthumous biography. His spirit guides were demons, actually, giving him insights. He realized that in these pagan myths and in the Eastern world, there was no such thing as guilt. Why? Because there was ultimately no such thing as objective, external truth by God. The reason is that in these pagan systems, you're able to see the opposites that conflict and join them together yourself. Ponder this for a moment. God did something really special in creation. He came down, He created the world, and He established some very unique distinctions. Distinctions for you and I to flourish in. Distinctions between God and humanity. There's a difference. Distinction between good and evil. Distinction between creator and creation. That which is greater made the lesser. Distinctions between male and female. Distinctions between the 7th day and the rest of the week. Between land and sea. light and darkness. All of these distinctions, friend, are under tremendous assault right here today, September 30th, 2023. Tremendous attack by the enemy. A total relativism of good and evil is where you bring what you think is good and evil, and then you join them together. In other words, you get to play God. You transcend them. You can do this because you are a valid, mature human being, is the reasoning. That was the basis of Jungian psychology. He called on people to develop their sense of the unconscious and their fantasies. Does this sound modern to you? As we see the madness of self-identified sexuality all around us. Yeah, that's where it led. These fantasies are now accepted as truth. For instance, friends, you can be a 6'4" man with hairy arms and hair all over your body, like Phil's son, Mike, and say, I'm a woman. That becomes a sacred viewpoint in our culture. I tell you, we are now in the world of fantasy, friends. We have left the very solid notions of biblical reality. And of course, all that is surrounded by these enticing notions of pagan spirituality and mysticism of the paranormal world. Indeed, Carl Jung was involved in the occult. He proposed liberation for human beings on the basis of the liberation of spirituality through paganism and free sex. Oh, it's not free, friends. It's a long line of consequences come from immorality. I can list 13 right now from the Bible. But there's a better way. Nancy and I had led out in the youth class of the ASI a number of years ago. And we had about 90 to 100 students, great kids, grew to love a lot of them. And I asked them one question one day when they came in. I said, now that you're all seated and comfortable, you all know, you've heard about sexual impurity and immorality, right? Now, I said, okay, what does it cost? Anyway, I don't know. I said, can you afford it? And you're like, I don't know. How much does it cost? I spent the next 45 minutes telling them what the cost was. At the end of it, I asked them the same question. They all said, we can't afford that. No, absolutely not. I'll just give you one snippet. There are, 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 5 major producers, hotbeds, unfortunate metaphor, where they produce pornography in the United States. One's in Orlando. There's 2 in California. There's 1 in Chicago. And there's a 5th one. These people that work in this trade, in this industry, pray over their product. And they ask the enemy to bind anyone who looks at it. So they'll want more. That's just one illustration out of about 20. In the last 10 years, I looked around in history to find a figure of equal importance to Carl Jung in history. And my finger at last fell upon Julian the Apostate, who in 358 AD, he was the nephew of Constantine, by the way. He was a historical liberal who was the architect of the first Sunday law. Now this man, Julian, who had been raised in a quote-unquote Christian home, it wasn't Christian by the standards of the Bible, but it was much better than the open paganism that had reigned throughout Rome. And this man, Julian, was raised in this kind of a quote-unquote Christian home. But when he became emperor, he tried to turn the nation back to the worship of Isis, the goddess of magic and the underworld, the worship of nature. And he failed. It is said that on his deathbed he uttered these words as he looked up toward heaven. You have conquered, Galilean. He couldn't beat Jesus, friends. And our wicked culture will one day utter those same words. Every knee will bow, according to Isaiah 45 and verse 23, I believe. But Carl Jung succeeded where Julian the Apostate failed. Julian tried to turn the Christian world back to overt paganism, but Carl Jung succeeded. He says the patriarchal monotheism of Orthodox Judeo-Christian faith has all but collapsed. And filling the void, we find Protestants, Catholics, and Jews adopting progressive spirituality belief systems and social justice / cultural Marxism, all of which or a religion, friends. But a neo-pagan religion, I can support that in 100 ways later if you like. Now let's turn for a moment to the concept of victimhood as a subtext. Sinners want comfort, and the easiest access to false comfort is to blame someone else. The woman thou gavest me, it's not my fault, it's someone else's fault. This leads to blaming God, and it is the very basic foundation of victimhood. The biggest conditions of a person's life, therefore, are not the conditions that others may have brought on them, but the condition of their own heart, of my own heart. If I can push everything that's wrong with me off on someone else, guess what? I don't have to repent. And I can't be saved. Right? Right. Victimhood refuses to consider this truth. And by the way, victimhood is very popular in our culture. Unbelievers, think about this for a minute. Unbelievers see some bad in their bad, but they see no bad at all in their good. Let me restate that. Unbelievers see some bad in their bad, but they see no bad at all in their good. They have become God. Victimhood leads them to see good in their bad. Yeah. Lady Gaga, 3 years ago, said that we need a new Christianity that accepts unrighteousness as righteousness. She didn't say it in those words, I'm paraphrasing. Back in 1967, there was a movement called the Death of God. Some of you remember that? Yeah. It was sweeping college campuses and universities. And some of you may remember when that became all the rage. And as we studied these theologians who talked about the death of God, that man no longer needed God anymore. He had come of age. We interpreted this as the success of secular humanism. And from then on, there would be less and less spirituality in Western culture because of this death of God movement. One of the theologians by the name of David Miller wrote a book in 1974 called The New Polytheism. And here is what he said. The death of God freed the West from the tyrannical imperialism of monotheism. And then he said, at the death of God, we will see the rebirth of gods and goddesses of ancient Greece and Rome. Isn't that amazing? That was in 1974. This man was mapping out the future, friends. 1974. 49 years ago. The reason why he knew the future was because he was a Jungian scholar, and he realized the power of Carl Jung's interpretation of the whole of psychology to get us in touch with the inner gods. Now, when I was a young man growing up in America, I never thought that America would ever be called Hindu. But that has become a reality. Really? Mm-hmm. Newsweek magazine recently stated we are all Hindus now, front page. As we all use Eastern terms like mantra and practice yoga. Well, it's not true. Not all of us do. But the great majority of them do. Even schools have brought yoga into their classrooms. And by the second session, they are teaching you how to look for divine enlightenment within. The second session. Escondido, California is one of those, along with Encinitas. In 1977, a book was published by a psychologist named June Singer. His title was Androgyny. We're moving towards what's happening sexually in the culture here, friends. The title was Androgyny, the opposites within. Androgyny means you can be both male and female at the same time, the joining of the opposites. Now, she was a personal friend of Carl Jung. She sat at his bedside while he died. And she wrote in this book calling for a new view of sexuality, namely joining of two genders, of male and female, which is what androgyny is. And in this book, she seeks to push forward Carl Jung's vision of a new humanism. Here's what she said. I quote, "What lies in store as we move towards the longed-for conjunction of the opposites is the bringing together of all these different categories into one. The question is, can the human psyche realize its own creative potential through building its own cosmology and supplying it with its own gods?" Kind of a confusing sentence, but you get the idea. There you have it. We see immediately that these neo-pagans wanted to develop not just a personal experience through meditation and individual enlightenment, but to develop a whole worldview that could be applied to the entire culture. It's a spiritual revival in reverse. That's a fundamental anti-Christian notion. You understand that as believers, friends. And this is the world in which we are called upon to preach the everlasting gospel in our time. You're needed, friends. Every one of you is needed. The world is dying for the truths that you and I hold. And we need to care enough about them to bring them the truths from the Word of God. It's the only thing that will set them free from this dark quicksand they're stuck in. And this kind of vision has reached high places of power. In the 90s, Gene Houston was the spiritual advisor and channeler. I don't use the word flippantly, for Hillary Clinton to get in touch with the spirit of Eleanor Roosevelt. Remember that? And during that period of time, Gene Houston produced this book. The same time that she was in the corridors of power in the White House. Her book is The Passion of Isis, the gateway to transcendent love. And currently we have Joel Hunter, who is today an advisor in the White House, who says the same things, maybe a little worse. And so in a certain sense, you could say that these people succeeded where Julian the Apostate failed in turning the world back into a pagan cosmology. We are in the presence of a cosmology or worldview that is committed to the destruction of the Christian worldview by proposing something that is superior to Christianity. That's what they claim to offer. What is the good news of this new religion? What are they selling? What do they have to offer, you and I? What is their evangelion? What is their good news? They are proposing that you and I can become gods ourselves. It's all embracing. And so I would suggest to you, as Sean Boonstra did 2 years ago, friends, that there are only really two religions anymore. Just two. The religion of God and the false religion of the enemy. It's just simple. I have a simple mind, and I find that a lot of other people do as well. And hopefully we get along fine. There are only two religions. You'll find that, I believe, in Romans 1:25. I would argue that there's a religion of non-binary and the religion of biblical distinctions. Non-binary, which is a term you're probably familiar with now, and the religion of biblical distinctions. In the non-binary religion, friend, there are no distinctions. Male can be female and female can be male. White can be black. Black can be white. Good can be bad and bad can be good. And you have just landed squarely in the midst of Isaiah 5:20. Everything is made of the same stuff. Matter is eternal and it has the spark of divinity within it, so we can worship it. That's the basis of nature worship, friends. And that is at its heartbeat. And by the way, there are three different kinds of environmentalists. Okay, there's the first kind is actually has some positive things to say to the world. It's called conservation. It's where you're not dumping your dirty motor oil in the creek to get rid of it, or burning tires in the fence row. That's what it means, partly to subdue the earth. And that's okay, and have dominion over it. But there's another kind of environmentalism. And I'll just take, by the way, any of you ever been to Europe? Yeah. Wife and I were we had our 40th wedding anniversary belatedly back in May, and we went to Europe, as I call it. Went to France and England. Had a wonderful time. Unfortunately, while we were in France, we blundered right into a riot. I mean, we was right in the middle of it. It was everywhere, which is like everywhere, only even bigger. We were right in the middle of it. On A13, between town of Rouen and Giverny. And that got kind of exciting. Well, I'll tell you the story if you really want to know. I'd promised my wife I'd take her to see Monet's garden, so I did. We had a house we'd rented up by Normandy, and so we were staying up there. We drove down toward Paris to Giverny, and we went to spend a delightful 3 hours there at Monet's place. Nice, it was sprinkling rain, but it was still beautiful. We walked through the gardens, had a great time, and we headed home on A13, 6-lane highway, in my French rental car, cruising along. And then I see some red smoke kind of drifting across the road up there, and as I got closer, it was thicker and heavier. I thought, red smoke, that's kind of odd. So I slowed down a little bit, and everybody around me slowed down, so what was going on? When we got closer, we saw that there were smoke bombs that were thrown out onto the road intentionally, and they were covering the road. So I slowed down to about 5 or 10 kilometers an hour. As soon as we did that, 200 people came pouring out of the woods on both sides of the highway. Blockaded the entire 6 lanes instantly. Okay, I'm drumming my fingers on the steering wheel. Lord, I need a little help now. I'm not sure what to do. So I just, you don't know what to do. You sit there. So I did. I sat there for a while. We were the third car back. I mean, we were right in the thick of it. So I looked around at my left and right to see what the other French drivers were doing, and they didn't look too concerned. They were French. They all surrendered right away. So I got out of the car. And I lock it, unlock it if I need back in. And I went around to my friend over here to the right, who's well, I say friend, I never met him. He was a Frenchman, him and his wife were in a minivan. I went over and knocked on the window. Yes. What's going on? He didn't speak English very well. His wife spoke a little. And she leaned over and she said, "It is protest." I'm like, yeah. And behind these people came 60 more dragging logs and sticks. Some of them logs were big. And they piled them up on the highway 4 feet high. And we're not going through that. All 6 lanes were blocked in a matter of 7 minutes. This was like a military operation. Man, they knew what they were doing. We were stuck. Now, my first thought when they were all lined up across the road, I thought, well, my rental car weighs about 2,930 pounds. The average Frenchman about 175. So maybe I can just kind of, like a cow, just kind of nudge them out of the way and go on. Because we had to be somewhere. Well, when the sticks and logs got there, that wasn't going to happen. So we just dropped anchor and stayed put. Finally, and they were all wearing black hoodies and masks like Antifa. I thought, boy, this doesn't look good. They didn't all of them, but a lot of them had sticks. They didn't have any guns, they had sticks. So I was standing there with my hands on my shoulders, thinking, okay, there's one of me and 200 of them. This is not good. I'll die protecting my wife if I have to. And finally, one of these young Antifa-looking girls came running away from the pack. She came running back through the cars with a sheaf of papers, and she starts passing them out. I said, hey, give me one of those. She gave me one. I couldn't read it. It was all in French. So I went back to my fellow driver there and I said, what is this? The lady looked at it and she said, they are protesting a new highway that might hurt the trees. Okay. So this little Antifa gal come running back up and I stopped her and I said, what are you doing? So we have to be somewhere. She spoke a little bit of English. She was kind of taken aback. I could tell that we were Americans. I don't think she was expecting any Americans to be trapped in there. By then, there was a half a mile of cars behind us, a kilometer almost each way, all stuck, trapped. And she said, only 15 minutes. As well, it's been 10 already. Okay. All right. Well, get going because we got to be somewhere. It turned out to be 2 hours. She wasn't very accurate. And then a big, tall Frenchman from a quarter mile back came walking up through the ranks there and stood there beside me with his arms crossed, and he wasn't very happy. I don't blame him. I said, who are these people? He spoke a little bit of English. He called into question the intelligence level of a portion of their anatomy, and then he left. Well, only 2 religions, friend. I mentioned there were 3 types of environmentalism. There is, like I mentioned earlier, conservation, which is reasonable. I mean, we need to conserve, enhance the earth's beauty, safety, and fruitfulness. That's exactly what we're charged to do in the book of Genesis. Subdue it, the earth, care for it, subdue it, enhance its beauty, fruitfulness, and safety. But there's another kind of environmentalism which we've seen arise in the last couple of centuries, which is called radical environmentalism. And that's where Mother Earth is being invested with some sort of deity. You've heard the term Gaia. Okay, that is the made-up name of the goddess of the Mother Earth, and you worship Gaia. And by the way, that worldview is rife throughout environmentalism. I can give you a whole series of examples, but there's one more kind, which you've seen a lot of lately, and that's apocalyptic environmentalism. What is that? How many of you have heard of Greta Thunberg? What if I say, how dare you? Does that ring any meme bells? That's her. They are apocalyptic environmentalists. They believe, they are convinced the earth is going to be destroyed in about 10 years or less. That human species will, either 50% of them will survive or none of them will survive. They're kind of arguing about whether we all want to die or just half of us. They're not sure yet. That's apocalyptic environmentalism. These are people who are gluing their hands to famous priceless paintings over in Europe, friends. These are people who are super gluing their hands to the asphalt pavement right in front of the Scotland Yard, right, Nancy? We were there. We walked right across that. Apocalyptic environmentalism. And by the way, this group that caused this riot there on A13 south of Rouen, I call it Rouen. I asked the French how to pronounce it. And why is it in French when they pronounce names, it almost sounds like they're being ill? I finally asked somebody, how do you pronounce the town of Rouen? They said, Rouen. I said, oh. Okay. Well, I think I'll just call it Rouen. But anyhow, that's exactly what these people were. They were apocalyptic environmentalists who are convinced that the earth is going to be destroyed. How do you like to get out of bed in the morning with that worldview? You got nothing to live for, no hope. There are only two religions, friends. It's that simple, and this is one of them that I'm describing here. We finally got out of there. The French riot police came, the gendarmerie. Oh, man, I was so glad to see them. They're a cross between the policemen and the military, and they come up there with their black riot gear on. They marched through there, and they went up and confronted these thugs, and there was about a 40-minute parley back and forth speaking in French. But I noticed something encouraging, that whenever the riot police took one step forward, the thugs took one step back towards the woods. I thought, well, that's encouraging. We're going to get out of this, maybe. There was a plainclothesman there who was probably a captain, Frenchman. I walked up to him and I typed in my phone, are these Extinction Rebellion people? And it translated, and I held it out to him. He took my phone and he said, we. Handed the phone back. In other words, that's Greta Thunberg. That's her group. These were Extinction Rebellion people, and they were spray painting on the concrete divider eco-terrorism. Yeah. Two religions, friends. Two religions. And I asked this kind French captain, I said, can I do something? Can I help drag some of the logs off the road? And he said, you're in France. We will handle it. I said, yes, sir. And they did. They opened up one lane finally after 2 hours, and we snaked on through. Well, only two religions, friends. Everything is made of the same stuff. Everything is eternal in the false religion. Everything has a spark of divinity within it, and so you can worship it. There's no category for sin because everything is within the circle, friend. Rocks, trees, good, evil, man, God, everything is within the circle. Everything is one. And in that circle, you can do whatever you want. You can invent gender and marriage. You have a tolerance for all religions and all lifestyles except one. All religions are welcome in Babylon, friend. All of them. Except the one. Christianity. Whereas in the Bible, in biblical religion, we have the wisdom of God based on his being totally separate from the things he made. That's the message of the Bible from the very first statement in the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There is distinction number one. The Creator made the creation. And that's the message in the Bible from the very first. Like C.S. Lewis says, everything else in the Bible from that stage on is pure commentary. And to say that God created nature, while it brings God and nature into kind of a relationship, it also separates them. Who makes it and what is made are two separate things. They're not the same, are they? No, they're separate. God is a God of distinctions. Well, neo-paganism is about joining the opposites, things that should not be the same. Male becomes female. Female becomes male. Light becomes darkness. Good becomes bad. Black becomes white. You might wonder what happened to the term New Age. Well, you don't hear it anymore, do you? And by the way, if you use that term around some of these people in their meetings, they'll look at you like you're an old fogey. New Age has gone mainline. No one uses the term anymore. But you can tell it's gone mainline because now people say this, and you've heard this statement, I'm spiritual, but not exactly. That's the mantra of this new integral spirituality. I'm spiritual, but not religious. It's a battle cry of the neo-pagan religion that has taken over Western culture. The current terms are, as I mentioned, integral spirituality or progressive spirituality. The joining of the opposites is a fundamental plank in the pagan worldview, and crucial to this worldview is sexuality. Now we get into our final subtext. And by the way, the clamor for women's ordination in evangelical churches and ultimately in the Adventist church have their basis in the celebration of the divine feminine, by the way. People try to justify it from the Bible, but the impetus behind it has its roots in this neo-pagan philosophy, the celebration of the divine feminine. Most Adventists don't understand that. And so they make these tortuous arguments to try to support it from the Bible, and it doesn't work. I appreciate you people here in Findlay. I appreciate your pastor very much. Back in May and early part of June, we had an opportunity to ask some questions of our Ohio conference. And the Findlay Church, along with some others, was right at the forefront of helping bring these questions into the light. Thank you, friends. I appreciate you. The question was about whether or not the Ohio Conference would come into harmony with the world church regarding the ordination standards of the church. That caused a very robust discussion at the constituency session there in June, I believe, 6th. So sexuality, it's a great thing. I mean, God has created it, and He's given it to male and female to be enjoyed within the confines of marriage. Wonderful thing. But it's being distorted. We have seen this in Western world's adoption of alternative sexuality. By the way, there are 3 types of intimacy. Did you guys know that? How many? When I was married, I thought there was 1 type. I was a guy. I thought it was really great. But I now know there are 3 kinds. There is spiritual, emotional, and physical, or sexual. 3 kinds of intimacy: spiritual, emotional, and sexual. I listed them in the biblical order: spiritual, emotional, sexual. Why is that order important? Because it's God's order. What does the world do to that order? Turns it upside down. Sexual to top. I mean, sexuality permeates everything, right? It permeates advertising, literature, marketing, music, entertainment, everywhere. It's airware, which is even more than everywhere. It's all over the place. And then, of course, emotional, it's okay. And then spiritual, they put at the bottom. But they're infusing spirituality with neo-pagan elements. We've seen this in the Western world's adoption of alternative sexuality. It's happening rapidly, friends. Huge moral shifts that used to take 80 to 100 years are now happening in a space of 7 to 10 years. Give you one illustration. October 2011. A major poll was taken of Americans to see how they felt about same-sex marriage. A majority of people said, nope. 7 years later, October 2018, same poll, different people. Majority of them said yes. 7 years time. Huge moral changes are occurring rapidly. Great changes are about to take place in our world, and the final movements will be rapid ones. In the last decade, in just 7 years, the majority of American people went from believing that same-sex marriage should not be legalized to a majority of people believing that it must be legalized. And along with the rising tide of moral lawlessness, I credit social media as a big factor in the accelerating velocity of hyper-cultural change. Acceptance is demanded. No other viewpoint is allowed. You've noticed that. Recently, there's no debate anymore. We're being silenced, friends. This is a deliberate rationalization of something that God does not approve or accept. And this new pagan religion, wokeness, cultural Marxism, is animated by a lively sense of self-righteousness and outrage. Any dissent is titled hate speech, and the necessity for self-justification requires the complicity of the entire culture. Holdouts cannot be tolerated. Why? Because they're potential rebukes. My grandpa was Amish. I've spent a lot of time around. I still have cousins in Holmes County that are Amish. I've been there. And a lot of people are attracted to their culture, and they come from the outside. English people, we call them, and they come and they like to enjoy it just for a moment, for a day, a part of the day, part of the culture, and enjoy some of the pie. Pie is great. But I notice some of the ladies that come there that are dressed rather inappropriately. When they come around the Amish, they come around, all of a sudden they're self-conscious. They're like nobody's condemning them or told them to do that. They just felt self-conscious. Why? Because the modesty of those Amish people is a potential rebuke to immodesty. You don't have to say a word. Marriage has been the bedrock of civilization for 2,000 years, friends. Western civilization, longer than that, but in Western culture, 2,000 years, 2 millennia. Prior to that, the Greco-Roman pagan world allowed all kinds of sexual expression and views of the divine, where some of us who study history are well acquainted with some of Hadrian's moral experimentations. But in understanding of both God and man, the West is now returning back to those pagan morals in the name of freedom, love, civil rights, diversity, and equality. Such values free us from the definitions of human nature established by the Creator. Darwin and Marx have won, friend, in a sense. Our culture no longer believes that God created the cosmos nor that He set marriage in place as the fundamental human societal building block. Now, people still want to be spiritual. They still want to have a moral universe and a sense of meaning for their lives, but shorn of any notion of a personal meaning-defining Creator. Thus, homosexuality demands gay marriage as its legitimizing ritual without any support or basis in the biblical account. The goal of this agenda, friends, is not just giving civil rights to a few people and then they'll go away and be happy. It's actually an entire reconstruction of the way we think about existence. You could tell that if you knew about the Gay Liberation Manifesto of 1972, which says equality is never going to be enough. For them, what is needed is a total social revolution, a complete reordering of civilization, including society's most basic institution, the patriarchal family. I fear the day may come someday when the Adventist Church is under pressure to rename one of their classic books, Patriarchs and Prophets. I don't know what they'll call it. Pangenders and Prophets, maybe. We're in that kind of culture, friends. We're in that kind of environment. Now, we could argue that the gay agenda is merely the tip of the spear of an ideology that wants to reinvent the notion of objective biblical truth. And by the way, patriarchy is widely hated. Why? Because it was set up by God where the man would be the provider, would be the protector of the family. That's really all that means. But it's come under tremendous assault from second-wave feminism down through fourth-wave. You hear the word patriarchy thrown about as if it's an epithet nowadays. Terrible. Patriarchy. Okay. Well, what other groups have taken on patriarchy as a sworn enemy? LGBTQ for one, and there are others. When you see that, stop and ask yourself, who made patriarchy and why are they so opposed to it? And so as I sum this all up, we have to understand, friends, not only our own theology, but the ideology of the world around us. And that's why I'm interested in culture, just as an observer. We need to be aware of what culture is saying in order to speak truth to it. A lot of people out there are hurting. I ran into a young fellow one time on an airplane, and he had experimented with a lot of alternative morality expressions. He was telling me all this, and he was kind of proud of it. About halfway through the flight, after listening to him, I turned to him and I said, I have a question for you. I said, has your life turned out the way you hoped it would? He started crying. I knew that I'd touched something. I wasn't there to expose him or hurt him. I just took some time to care about him and gained a friend for the rest of that flight. We had a great talk. If you'll just take some time and listen to people and then ask them a non-threatening question. See, that question, he wasn't expecting it. It went under his radar, under his defenses, and touched that tender spot in his heart where truth lies and where he knows that he's not the way he wants to be. That his own life is in conflict with the will of his Creator. And that's why that we're interested in culture as observers, friends. We want to be aware of what's happening in there, just speak truth to it. These new neo-pagan writers and thinkers believe that the human mind had been limited by secular humanism, and it needed to be broken open to receive the intelligence of the spirit world. But what spirit? For many years, secular humanism would not even consider this type of spirituality. But now they're buying into it. And they don't find it primitive anymore. They are calling for an intimate relationship with nature and the larger cosmos by the mediation of spirits. Didn't Ellen White say that in the end time? Spiritualism would be one of the two great spears pointing at the world. Yeah. For them, the cosmic creation force is female. This could be paving the way for a divine manifestation of the Virgin Mary to come along and broker some sort of pseudo-peace. I don't know. I don't know yet, friends. But I do know that that's what these great trends are creating. Scientific atheism and New Age pantheism are destined to come together and form a powerful opposition to Christianity in the end. Friend, we can sum it up this way. False religion persecutes genuine religion in the end. It's really that simple if you want to try to sum it up. And maybe you can sum it up better than I can. That's okay. False religion persecutes genuine religion in the end. Apostate Protestantism persecutes genuine religion. Children today are the first generation in 500 years to have grown up in an almost entirely pagan meta-narrative. Wow. They are facing neo-pagan challenges that have not been seen in the West since the time of the Reformation, friend. Now, we're told in the book of Revelation that the end-time power has two striking characteristics. Number one, it is coercive. Number two, It seeks worship for itself. If you're ever part of any group, organization, or movement, friends, that is coercing the will of others, hear my words this afternoon. You're on the wrong side of history. If you ever look at yourself and in horror say, "Well, I'm trying to coerce someone to doing something," you're on the wrong side. God's will and His ways are not coercion, but rather persuasion through truth, through the revelation of truth. We're also told that apostate Christianity, apostate Protestantism will play a major role in the time of the end. Some elements of this new apostate Christianity or paganism are radical environmentalism, where Mother Earth is worshipped and regarded as some sort of deity. Feminism, where the sacred feminine is united with spirituality in the natural world. The rise of the neo-pagan sacred feminine in our culture, for instance, as I mentioned earlier, has helped influence and motivate clamor for women's ordination in the church. LGBTQ, and they put a plus on the end of it intentionally. What that means is they have pre-approved anything else that comes down the pike. The plus signifies their pre-approval for whatever else is out there and is coming. I have a few ideas on what's coming, but I'll leave that for now. Abortion, not having children to violate the natural order of the planet. Save the trees, but abort the babies. And lastly, the wholesale condemnation of Caucasian people as if they are to blame for all of society's ills. We first saw this in 1930s Germany regarding Jewish people, friend. Well, a question as we bring this to a close. What is apostate anyway? It is those who have turned from good to bad. They have repented from good to evil. They are no longer Christians, but an amalgamation of neo-pagan spiritualism, cultural Marxism, and the homicidal hostility of Cain towards God-humble followers, Abel. In other words, we are in a spiritual revival in reverse. False religion persecutes genuine religion in the end, Revelation 13:15. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image to be killed. So what has happened is a radical, catastrophic change from a binary civilization, male and female, God and human, creator and creation. There's been this horrendous change from a binary civilization with all of its problems to a militant neo-pagan civilization, or maybe I'll call it non-binary to put it in today's terms. In other words, from a Christian to a pagan culture, I believe we are facing an ideological leviathan, friend, with a thoroughly worked out pagan cosmology, and it's in that context God is asking you and I to speak the everlasting gospel. And we can do that with His grace. Ancient Rome believed that God is a part of nature. Christianity believes that God is external and that religion doesn't change. True religion. Should put that qualifier on there. It may develop, but it has fundamental notions that give humanity all the truth that we need to be human beings. There are only two human realities, friends, according to Romans chapter 1. There are only two ways of being human. Which one we choose? We will either worship the Creator God, who's forever praised, or we will worship the creation in 1,000 different ways. Those are the only two human realities. And a number of years ago, right here in Ohio, we saw the proliferation of an ideology that would bring that kind of mysticism right into the Adventist church, friends. And there are some in this room that lived that reality. It was a pretty dark time. Fortunately, we've snapped out of that. Hopefully permanently, but at least temporarily. What else would you call a conference president who invites a man to come and speak to the pastors, and the man teaches them that there's an idea stream rotating around the earth like the rings around Saturn. And all you need to do to get good ideas is to tap into that stream in your subconscious. State of Ohio, 2010, 2006 through 2013. Let's go on here. There are only two human realities. And so what can we do, friends? All I can tell you is my hope and prayer. I believe the only answer to this self-justifying, rationalizing, all-inclusive, neo-pagan, non-binary cosmology is the proclamation of the everlasting gospel. This message alone will save the millennial generation, friends, and us as well. I remember the first time I read The Great Controversy, I thought, what is this? I'd heard about this woman that had written some stuff, and I thought, what's she going to say? So I did the only logical thing to do. I asked for a copy of the book. Somebody gave me one called Cosmic Conflict. You've heard of it. I took it home. I put it on the headboard of our bed. We like to read before we go to sleep. So I put it up there, and then it became invisible for about 3 days. I forgot about it. The devil does that, you know. And all of a sudden, one night, it's about 9:30, I was laying in bed, I looked up there, and I saw that in the corner of that book. I said, pulled it down. I want to see what this person has to say. Opened it up. If thou, even thou, had known in this the day of thy visitation the things which belong unto thy peace. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem. And I thought, wow. This isn't what I expected. The Son of God was in tears, the very first page. And I was drawn into it. It was the same voice I was hearing in Scripture. I'm a writer, but I can't write like that, friends. I can try, but I can't. Writing's fascinating, by the way. You all use the same 26 building blocks. Okay? I don't care who you are. You're going to write something, you're going to use the same 26 building blocks. Just how you stack them. I can stack them in a way that make you laugh. I can stack them in a way that make you cry, probably, or feel like it. But there was a mortar between these building blocks that I could not fabricate in the spirit of prophecy. There are 5 things that amaze me, friends, as I close. I'm amazed how God can change a life. And I'm amazed how Jesus healed people through love and through truth. I am amazed how sin binds and destroys people. I am amazed how repentance and cleansing frees people. And I'm amazed how accurate the Bible is to provide answers for every problem that you and I struggle with. We are Christ's church on earth, friends. Read the Bible and hang on to its words. It is life, truth, peace, and joy. Evil has dug into this planet. It has nowhere else to go. It has no future. And as truth spreads throughout the world, it will be their end. Evil will do everything possible to maintain control, and the way they do that is through mass psychosis. If you've ever studied psychological warfare, you understand that prolonged anxiety, together with fear and human isolation, causes the human spirit to decompensate and become psychotic. An individual becomes so paralyzed by fear that the power of reason doesn't matter anymore, and they gravitate toward whatever false god will alleviate that fear. We saw that in Technicolor in 2020, in 2021. The solution, friend, is to not give in to the fear. Don't give in to the isolation. Do not let the tactics of evil divide and separate you. As the psalmist says, one day all the ends of the earth will fear him. Psalm 67:7. I love that passage. And Isaiah 45:23 says, every knee will bow. Remember Nebuchadnezzar? What a wonderful story, friends. The final testimony of Nebuchadnezzar will one day be taken up on the lips of all pagan rulers and nations, both past and present. Some of them to their salvation, and some to their everlasting condemnation. Thank you. God bless you. If you have any questions, we'll save a little bit of time here.
I thought we go enough so we can have a open discussion.